My name is Nikhil Chopra. I live in Goa on the west coast of India. My process is very connected to people. It really, at the end of the day, is about conversations and dialogues that I would like to generate around me. I think of myself as an artist who enjoys kind of putting in that cauldron various aspects of my talent and makeup. Drawing and painting being really at the backbone of what I do, and that's how I've been trained. But also trying to find a language that is kind of unique to what I do. I bring in performance and elements of the theatre into my practice as well. So it's a sort of mashup of drawing, painting, performance art, and theatre. So I kind of like to think of myself as someone who sits in the spaces between, let's say, drawing and painting, between performance and theatre. And my identity and my makeup and my history and my manner in a way is essentially scrutinized through the act of making. I do think of my past from a very critical place. I do think of myself as a colonized body. And the sort of act of performing and making art is really a way for me to dismantle and question, in a way, these various presets, whether they are about being a man, whether they're about being Indian, whether they're about being urbanized, whether they're about being international. These questions really do become a very important part of that narrative that I like to play with. And that's what I'm bringing here to Swansea as well. I put the drawing really at the center of what I'm doing, and that really becomes the task that I give myself. And that's a very daunting task, right? To look at a blank piece of canvas and to say, okay, well, how is this composition going to pan out? And certain things enter the work, which is an element of trust, and allow for doubt and mistakes and stumbles and falls to really become part of the mise en scène of the piece. But also to look at, as I mentioned, landscapes from a place of subjugation and subjecting land, in a sense, to the way in which we subject bodies, and to kind of extend from the body into landscape and allow for the landscape to extend into the body. So largely what I'm doing over the past few years is sort of, in a way, even blurring the lines between body and landscape as body. And then how do we understand ownership? In a way, the work began with me thinking about how colonizers sort of came to the subcontinent and used image making as a way to exercise ownership, turn of the century etchings and drawings were taken back to empire and brought back to empire, and were used as sort of trophy heads, if you will, like, a tiger head saying, oh, look at what we own now, So I kind of use this idea of making drawings as a form of exercising my ownership. So I'd like to think about the fact that as I make this drawing of Wales, through this act I become the owner, in a sense, of this landscape and of this place and of this moment. So it's really about exercising ownership and taking back that power from powers that, had us feel powerless, So this act of drawing really becomes an important tool to tip the scale and to balance that relationship with power. And over the past years, I've been very interested in landscapes in distress. I'm not really interested in landscapes from a place of romance as much as I'm interested in how troubled the ecology is, and how troubled, in a sense, not just the ecology, but also in our relationship to landscape is really about map making and drawing lines and borders and boundaries. And a lot of the work that I've been doing is about blurring those boundaries and erasing some of those boundaries and looking at a tree for a tree and not on whose land that tree sits on. And also then to look at the factory as a factory and not whose factory it is, but just the fact that it sits there like a canker sore in the middle of like pristine nature. And that's really been what's informed my sort of composition of this performance. Well, that's on one side. And on the other side, I have really enjoyed looking at the history of this building. the Glynn Vivian gallery and the persona of Glynn Vivian, and really kind of enjoyed looking at it with a bit of tongue in cheek, and I kind of enjoy how Glynn Vivian was this flaneur, was this dandy who traveled the world extensively with his sketchbook and recorded and also collected and did these like acts, if you will, which seemed to be quite performative to an extent, was to not just fit in, but to validate his position as a British citizen. And Wales really is, like, if we were to kind of look at the history of this place, I mean, I can look at it from a place of saying Wales was probably one of the first colonies of the British Empire. And what it does is, I mean, these powers, in a sense, put us in a position where we need to aspire to become subjects of that empire. And so I see Glynn Vivian's life process as a means for him to get validation for his existence and his nobility. And in a way, there are slippages in that space because he doesn't quite make it. There's a clumsiness in the way in which he goes about it, which I'm really excited and interested in, because there is a place where we need to kind of look at aspiration as the back end of what hegemonic power does. It makes us into things that they want us to see us as opposed to how we choose to create ourselves and what light we want to create ourselves in. So the script was, in a sense, handed to Glynn Vivian, and he interprets it, and that interpretation is something that I find very interesting, especially in the collection, but also in the way in which he dressed up, and he enjoyed kind of a theatricality to his life that's really informed my research for this piece.